Hello, friends. Why have many European countries given warnings to the media about preparing for war? Whether this war will happen or not? Let's find out together. Recently, the French army commander said publicly that the French army is ready. Specifically, he said that no matter what the international situation turns out to be, the French can be sure that their soldiers are ready to respond. According to him, displaying France's military capabilities would deter any attack on France, in which he cited an adage: if you want peace, prepare for war. The general added that France could mobilize a division of 20,000 troops into an alliance within 30 days, and he himself could command an army of about 60,000 people by coordinating the countries. Allez. The French army said it had 121,000 soldiers and could mobilize 24,000 reservists, although he did not specifically mention the Russia-Ukraine war and the risk of widespread conflict. However, he said that the sources of crises are increasing, making them at risk of growing or expanding. If you follow regularly, you will see that the stance between the French president and Russian President Putin is getting tougher. The French leader recently said that Mr. Putin is a threat not only to Ukraine, but also to the security of all Europeans. France also blames Russia for a series of cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. President Macron, who has repeatedly stated that Russia cannot win this war, and as you know in the previous video, is also the one who made NATO worry and shocked when he announced it. He did not rule out the possibility that the West would deploy troops directly to the Ukrainian battlefield. Immediately, many of France's allied countries rejected this idea, for fear that a direct confrontation with Russia could lead to war. Nuclear war and sending Europe back to the Stone Age. Not only France, Britain has also made statements related to the tense situation with Russia. Specifically, General Patrick Sonder not long ago said that British citizens should prepare to fight a ground war. Can happen. Next is Sweden. The commander-in-chief of the Swedish army also made many people in this country wary when he said Sweden must mentally prepare for war. And that is NATO's story. As for the Russian side, it seems that their view also shows that everything is no longer simply a war in Ukraine. Specifically, when asked by the Western press, President Putin answered about the possibility of a widespread war, saying that everyone clearly sees that this is only one step away from leading to World War II. 3. Comprehensive. I think almost no one cares about this, Mr. Putin replied, after he won and was president for another 6 years. Besides, President Putin also said that NATO troops were present there. Ukraine is long gone, not as the French president is threatening to send French troops to Ukraine. Specifically, Mr. Putin said that NATO soldiers were present in Ukraine, even adding that they were dying there in large numbers. President Putin said he hoped the French president would not aggravate the war in Ukraine, but should play a role in finding peace. Currently, the war in Ukraine is still very tense. In fact, this war is not more fierce than before. Ukraine is gradually losing land to Russia. However, the problem is more complicated in that Ukraine is now said to be trying to attack Russian territory, but through proxy forces, Russians who are close to Ukraine. Specifically, during the recent Russian election, Russia accused Ukraine of increasing offensive activities inside Russian territory. The country's Ministry of Defense announced that it had shot down 12 missiles, believed to have been launched from Ukraine to Belgorod province, and continued to shoot another drone, also suspected to have been launched by Ukraine. On Telegram, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced the destruction of 17 UAVs in the south of the country, 4 in the Moscow region and some in 6 other areas. Russia was also attacked on 4 oil refineries. Before in the morning of this attack, the Russian defense minister had to order more firepower to be placed on the warships of the Black Sea Squadron to stop the enemy's UAVs. In addition, President Putin also asked Russian security to punish traitors who are Russians who are close to Ukraine and stand up to support Ukraine. Specifically, Mr. Putin said that we must not forget whoever these traitors are. They must be identified and punished whenever and wherever they are. In addition, President Putin also affirmed that all efforts to penetrate Russian territory by armed groups close to Ukraine have failed. President Putin said that these armed groups have suffered heavy losses while being treated as pawns by their bosses abroad. They deserve this even though Russia holds Ukraine responsible for a series of incursions by the above-mentioned armed groups. However, Ukraine has repeatedly asserted that the above-mentioned Russian groups launched their own attacks on Russian territory and did not operate under Ukraine's orders. Ukraine also added that it is clear that Russia cannot control the domestic situation in favor of Ukraine. So internal attacks will cause Russia to disperse its forces to deal with and provide security in this area, weakened, causing Russia to lose more resources to patch the vulnerability. However, some Western experts believe that cross-border raid efforts will give Russia an advantage on the information front, helping the country's public unite and support the government more. Currently, Ukraine is quite weak in counterattacking to repel Russian troops. Besides, Ukraine's fighting also seems weaker in spirit and lacking more weapons. As in the previous video, we learned that many Ukrainian soldiers are feeling injustice on the miserable battlefield, while their friends back home are still living peacefully, enjoying fun and indifferent to the war. Their enthusiasm, they are no longer the same as when Russia first attacked. As for weapons, Ukraine's artillery shells are now only 1/3 full before they were able to fire freely to attack Russia. But now they only have enough bullets to defend. However, currently the U.S. Secretary of Defense still declares that they will at all costs not let Ukraine fail, and will do everything possible to convince European allies that the U.S. is committed to continuing to support Ukraine. However, whether the U.S. Secretary of Defense's commitment is real or not, many people are skeptical about this, because currently the U.S. Congress continues to delay aid to Ukraine, and the U.S. Secretary of Defense has not said how the U.S. will support Ukraine if there is no additional budget. Meanwhile, the White House is struggling to find aid to send to Ukraine. Officials say the lack of funding has affected the battlefield, and Ukrainian forces are struggling because of scarce resources. Support for Ukraine is now just a trickle, like the Israelis watering the desert. For example, last week, President Biden said he would send $300 million in support to Ukraine, but clarified that it was a budget amount. Unusual thanks to unexpected savings from Pentagon military contracts. So now the U.S. military has to save every penny to send to Ukraine, and the U.S. side also affirms that that amount will not be enough to compensate for the budget deadlock in Congress. U.S. officials said that the reality is that without the U.S., European support for Ukraine is not enough to fight Russia. What about the highly anticipated U.S. support of up to $60 billion? An amount of money sufficient for Ukraine to sustain the war for a long time is currently being blocked by the Republican Party. As you know, the Republican Party believes that it is not necessary to support Ukraine with a lot of money, because the U.S. also needs money for more important issues, such as immigrants at the border. So in the future, well, whether the aid package will be approved or not, it is very difficult for us to predict. And that is the situation in the Ukraine war and why it can spread. Thank you for watching the video. Goodbye, and see you again.